guys, so we're going to read chapter 17 of Far North today. The question's super simple. One of them you can't do unless you have a book. So if you have a book, you can do it super easy. If you don't have a book, you get to skip the question today. The other question is actually really simple as well. You're coming up with a title that you would give this chapter. See, they just say chapter 17. They don't come up with a creative title. That's going to be your job for this one. And then you're going to explain why you gave it that title. I would like you to email me your explanation because I want to see how creative you guys are. I'm usually very impressed with that. So, here we go, chapter 17. Oh, yeah, and we left chapter 16 with kind of a cliffhanger. They found a ram, which is super exciting because they need food. So, okay, here we go. The ram was standing amid the skulls and skeletons of sheep that must have starved to death in this cave over the centuries. Can we get him out of there once you shoot him? I wondered aloud. Slide down just like he did, then chop stairs back up with the axe, Raymond said with a smile on his face, the first in a long time. The ram just stood there, looking up at us. Raymond lay down on his belly with the rifle. He took aim and focused all of his concentration. I'm sure the cold metal touching his bare hand burned like fire. I was just hoping that the ram didn't make a sudden move. I expected the blast of the rifle at any instant. Instead of firing, Raymond set the rifle down and reached for his glove. Wait a minute, he said, looking up at me. Maybe we don't have to shoot him. Maybe we can get him with the axe and save this bullet. Of course, I said. What a great idea. Should I slide down into the cave? Let's think some more about how we're going to do this. That sheep isn't going anywhere. Let's find camp, start a fire, eat some food, and get some rest. We climbed back down the cliff. 100 yards further along the base of the cliff, we found another cave and made camp there. That evening, we each ate 3 plates of stew. In the morning, we ate 3 more, nearly finishing our rations. The ram was laying down when it saw us appear. It stood, looking up at us. We took off our masks. They were such a hindrance. I slid down first, avoiding the scattered skulls and bones. The ram retreated into the poor light at the back of the cave, squared off, and lowered his head, fronting those huge horns. The cave had a faint sweetness to its musty air, an ancient residue of death. The axe! I called up to Raymond, wondering if the ram might charge me. The ram stayed put as I began to chop our stairs back up. When I finished the last step and joined Raymond at the top, the ram ran back into the light, stared up at us, and gave a snort. Killing this ram might not be so easy, I said, even with the 2 of us. You're right, Raymond nodded. He could swing us bad with those horns before we could get a swing at him. How about a lasso? I suggested. We could take apart the pole rope on the toboggan. When the time came, the ram skittered back and forth across the dusty floor of the cave a couple of times, then froze at the back in the near darkness to face us. I had the lasso ready, but aiming was going to be difficult. I crept closer, knowing the ram was thinking about charging. If he did, I was going to get behind Raymond and his axe real quick. A half-dozen times my crude lasso came close, striking the ram's horns but falling to the ground. At last, it settled over the horns, and I cinched it down fast. You got him, I heard Raymond explain. The ram bolted from the back of the cave away from the both of us, and I held on tight. Suddenly, I lost my footing and went down hard, and was being dragged across the floor of the cave. I saw the ram kicking at the rope, fighting it. Then he tripped and went down, hooves and horns flailing all over the place as Raymond came down on him with the dull butt of the axe head again and again. Shuddering, the ram was in his death throes. Then I looked up at Raymond and saw that he had taken a deep gash on his forehead and was bleeding all over his parka. He had his hand up against his head, trying to stop the blood. Hoof got me, he explained, as I picked myself up. Look at all this meat, he said, freeing his sheath knife. He bent over the ram and bled it at the throat. Let's take care of you first, I insisted. Your forehead is bleeding pretty good. We got the blood stopped with Raymond's bandana, then climbed out and returned to the camp. I boiled some water and cleaned his wound, about 3/4 of an inch long. Raymond didn't want me to try stitching it up. No way you're putting a needle in my forehead, he said. Not without an anesthetic. If you don't know what an anesthetic is, I want you to look it up, or you can talk to your parents about it. This is something that doctors give you when you have to go get stitches. So if I had a gash on my forehead, they would use a needle, a syringe, and they would put anesthetic in the gash to numb it, so I wouldn't feel pain as they're stitching it up. Okay, that's pretty much it. I used a couple of butterfly bandages on it and then taped down a gauze dressing over that. Good work, cowboy, he told me when I was done. Let's go get that sheep. Our feast began with 2 smoking hot sheep kidneys that Raymond insisted couldn't be wasted. We decided to stay for a few days, eat all we wanted, and get our strength back. The next day, we made an interesting discovery about our cave. The front edge of its floor was a rubbish heap of bones and broken arrow points. We figured out that the blacking on the walls of the cave must have come from the smoke of countless prehistoric cooking fires. Raymond's ancestors knew this place well, we decided, and had camped here to take advantage of the sheep that fell down the slide in the neighboring cave. A raven sailed by, eyeing us at close range. Raymond threw a few scraps at it. It came close, within 10 or 12 feet, taking the food, watching us with cold black eyes. Raymond fed it all it wanted. The big bird did a few hops, both feet at once, then it flew away croaking, wingtips thrashing the heavy air. I asked Raymond how it ever happened that he had stopped at the spot where the sheep climb into the cavern and figured all that out. I heard a raven flying up around there, he said. I think the raven could see the sheep. Did you see the raven? With a shake of his head, he said, It was weird. I looked for it, but I couldn't see it. I only heard its wings. After 2 days, with our strength returning, we knew we had to set out again and try to find a moose. Our breath made those crackling sounds again as it hit the air. It was 55 degrees below zero when we left the cave. We had to go slow in order to avoid getting our clothes damp from exertion, from sweat. At this temperature, we couldn't afford any mistakes, and yet we had to try to get over the mountains and into the Yukon. Raymond mentioned that his father always said it was okay to be out in the cold working on the trap line, until nothing was moving in the woods. Does it get this cold down at Nahanni Butte? I asked. At the village? Sometimes, but we don't even play street hockey when it gets this cold. Does your father still run his trap line? 2 years ago, he got the job keeping the diesel generator going. It makes the electricity for Nahanni Butte. He's a great mechanic. That's how I learned how to fix snowmobiles. Other than the occasional rifle shot crack of a tree freezing and splitting, complete silence reigned in the woods. A profound stillness without even the suggestion of wind. The only sound was that of a raven, sometimes overhead, its ragged wingtips beating the dense air. The snowpack had set up like iron, and the snowshoes gave us complete freedom on it. Raymond's frosty breath ahead of me made fog that swirled around his head and hung in his wake. Squirrels were still moving around in the trees, and sometimes we walked right up on snowshoe hares without seeing them until they suddenly darted away. If you look up what a snowshoe hare looks like, it's an entirely white rabbit that blends in perfectly with the snow. They're actually very cute. I highly suggest that you look it up with your parents. The waxing moon rose high in the sky, lighting our way for hours after twilight was gone. It was so bright, reflecting off of the snow, I could have read a book by it. The mountain ranges stood out with amazing clarity as they shone in the moonlight. their countless jagged peaks rising from an all-white world that floated high above the dark forests. I would have thought that the moon would hug the winter horizon in the north like the sun does, but its arc carried it above the highest mountains. We benefited from it, putting on the miles. The northern lights would come and go, swirling and dancing and shape-shifting. They made me think of Johnny Raven. Sometimes I thought I heard a sound that accompanied them, like a humming synthesizer music, or something like electronic music. I'm guessing that's what he means. And I guessed it was some of the natural phenomenon associated with the lights. But then I decided it was only my mind playing tricks. So a word that I want you guys to look up the definition for and use in your vocabulary this week is phenomenon. Okay? It is spelled, ready? It's kind of long. So phenomenon. Phenomenon. Lots of N's. So look it up, find out the definition, and then use it in your vocabulary at some point this week, all right? Here we go. We were traveling through an unworldly dimension, and yet it wasn't a dream. Raymond and I almost never spoke. It felt like we both knew we were marching toward those black spaces between the stars. As I pulled the toboggan, it helped to let my mind drift, having long conversations with my father. I lost all touch with Raymond, who must have been having conversations of his own in his head. Who with, I wondered? His parents? His brother and sisters? Johnny Raven? Hike, make shelter, get firewood, melt snow for drinking water, eat, try to get snatches of sleep while you weren't fighting the cold or feeding the fire. Nothing could be accomplished without immense effort and the pain that reminded us we were still alive. The sheep steaks came out of the sack hard as bricks. To keep up our strength, we ate all that we could. We no longer had the will to ration ourselves. So, because they were so hungry, because it was so cold, they're like, I'm just going to eat as much as I can. I'm not going to waste any of it, and I'm also not going to ration it out. I'm not going to have, okay, only this much for Monday, this much for Tuesday. No, I'm going to eat as much as I want on Monday and as much as I want on Tuesday. That's where they're at. On our third day out of the cave, we crested the mountains at a wide pass and paused to get our bearings. We had to be looking into the Yukon and the headwaters of the Beaver River on the other side, because as far as we could see, the land sloped down and away into a long river valley. We were both standing there, gasping for breath after the searing climb. Raymond looked up like he saw something, and then his eyes went back to the rocky ridgeline up above us along the divide. After a minute, he said to me, "That Raven." I was still panting like a worn-out pack horse. All I could think about was how good it was going to feel to start the long downhill. I hadn't seen a raven. Didn't you see that raven?" Raymond asked. His voice was hoarse. His face was hidden behind the red mask, which was iced around the mouth and the nose holes. His eyelashes had partially frozen together. His lips, like mine, were cracked and caked with dried blood. I shook my head. Nope. It flew right by a minute ago. It tucked and rolled right in front of us. Then it flew over to that tree way over there, the one by itself up in those rocks. It's still there. Panting, he pointed out the tree, but I still couldn't see the bird. Ravens are big and black. The tree was quite a distance off. I squinted, trying to make out a raven. I can't see it, I said, but I wondered if his mind was playing tricks on him. Sorry, I said. I just can't see it. You didn't hear it either? It called. Gaga, gaga. Animal. I shook my head. I was daydreaming. I've heard so many ravens, maybe I just tuned it out. We'd have to do a lot more climbing to go up there, Raymond said. What was he talking about? Climbing way up on that ridge? After a raven? For a second, I thought I was going to lose it, blow up at him in utter frustration. I held on. I waited. I caught my breath. He'd never blow up on me. I looked down into the Yukon slide that laid out before us, its mountains worn down and subdued compared to all the jagged ridges behind us. It was more important to stick by Raymond than to make sense. "You're our hunter," I said. "You should call it. Even if it doesn't work out, I could use the exercise." He laughed. A laugh was a scarce commodity. That means it didn't come around often. I said, "I feel as strong as a half-dead muskox." Despite his mask, I could detect a weak smile. Raymond said, "You are a muskox, little brother." We struggled up the ridgeline to the wind-twisted spruce where Raymond's raven had landed. No raven in sight. "Maybe I'm going crazy," Raymond said. Now what, I thought. Here we are at the absolute screaming end of nowhere. Still perplexed, Raymond was looking all around for his raven. At last, his gaze fixed on a narrow gap between the divide ahead of us and several feet below. "I see blood on the snow," he said. I squinted hard. I thought I saw some spots of bright red. "I think you're right," I said. I followed him down to the gap. We found a trail of blood and the tracks of a moose. Alongside the tracks of the moose, the tracks of wolves. I knelt to touch the blood to tell myself I wasn't imagining all of this. It was real. "Look at this," Raymond said. He was pointing to large bird tracks in the snow. Raven tracks. I shook my head, trying to add it all up. I couldn't. The important thing was, here was the trail of a moose. The blood trail had come from the Yukon side and was leading down into the headwaters of the stream that flowed off the divide into Deadman Valley. "Raymond," I said, "I don't get how you saw and heard that raven." "He's a trickster," Raymond replied, as if that explained everything. Then I remembered something. "In Johnny's letter," I said, "remember how he said he had strong raven medicine and wanted to pass it on?" "I remember." "Well, the night before he died, in the middle of the night, and it was the middle of the night, and I couldn't sleep, I saw him standing over you, arms out wide like wings, making these little hops like the raven was making that you were feeding back in the cave." Raymond looked away, and then he murmured, "Raven medicine." "You never saw the raven when you found the sheep?" "I only heard its wings." "Strange stuff," I said. Raymond pulled his water bottle from inside his parka and took a slow drink. "I don't know what's going on," he said finally. "Maybe all that medicine stuff the old guys talk about, they didn't make it up. Out here, everything's different from the way it is in town. Should we go after this moose? It's a fresh trail. Who knows when we'd find another one? We could take it away from the wolves. Wolves are afraid of people." For 2 days, we followed the blood trail, using the moon to keep up, as it was approaching full. When it had some size to it, the moon was practically around the clock and high in the sky. "Like the sun is in the summer," Raymond explained. We didn't dare to leave off pursuit to camp, cook, eat, or sleep. It had warmed up to about 35 below, a tolerable temperature compared to what we had experienced. My feet and fingers didn't ache so badly. The sun, when it did make its appearance, was copper-colored and hazy with a ring around it. Raymond said that meant another cold spell was coming, a deeper, longer cold spell. We paused only to chop holes in the creeks and boil water. Drinking cold water or eating snow would chill us from the inside, and we knew that was dangerous. At one point, we heard a raven calling above us. We watched as it landed in a snowbank about 100 yards in front of us along the trail of the moose. When we were halfway to the raven, it started sliding down a snowbank on its back. As soon as it got to the bottom, the raven would walk back to the top, then repeat the strut. "I can't believe it," I said. "Yeah, ravens do that kind of stuff," Raymond said. "He's a real clown." "That's what the stories say. He's lazy, too, and a thief. Hardly gets his own food. He fools everybody, so he gets by easy." "But Johnny was named after him." "Named after Raven's Eye. That's what he said in the letter. Raven's Eye is a good name for a hunter, don't you think? Raven knows the land better than anyone. The old stories say he made it in the first place. Ravens see everything. They know everything that's going on, what's going to happen." As we approached the snowbank, the raven flew away croaking. He never had to tell us about the moose, Raymond said. He didn't need us. He'd get fed anyway from when the wolves took the moose down. But everybody knows stories about ravens helping people when they feel like it. The amount of blood on the moose trail seemed to stay the same. It seemed that when the wolves had first attacked on the Yukon side, they hadn't inflicted a serious injury. The moose was still strong, Raymond said, but the wolves were patient. He said that the wolves were driving the moose down off the mountains and into the bottom of Deadman Valley on purpose. There would be places down in the bottom of the valley where they could use the deep snow to their advantage. Raymond was right. The trail kept leading to Deadman Valley. From a ridge, we spotted the wolves the third day. In the distance, the moose was crossing a clearing with 7 or 8 wolves trotting behind. We kept going, slowing down as we encountered deeper snow in the valley. The trail showed the moose sinking through all the way to the ground, 4 feet or so. We didn't know how close we really were, but then we heard the moose up ahead moaning in agony. The trail was showing more blood. The wolves had attacked again. Raymond carried his rifle at the ready. We both knew this moose was our last chance. With its meat, we could wait out the rest of the winter. We shooed faster as light snow began to fall. Half an hour later, the daylight was going down. From the moaning of the moose, we knew we were close, and we walked much more cautiously. The size of the wolves' tracks astonished me. 5 inches across in the fresh snow. So that's a big paw. We caught sight of them again in a clearing up ahead where the moose had foundered in deep snow, then turned to face them. It was a cow moose, female. Without antlers, she had only her front hooves for defense. They made formidable weapons as she turned to fend off the wolves darting at her backside. Through the falling snow, I counted 7 of them. 2 yellowish white, 2 gray, and 3 black, much bigger than I would have thought possible. We crept to the edge of the trees. The moose was no more than 100 yards away, encircled by the wolves. The moose looked ghostly in the dim light with the snow accumulating on her back. Maybe we should wait until tomorrow, I whispered to Raymond. They'll finish her tonight, he whispered back. It's gotta be now. Can you get closer? Go out into the clearing? They'll spook. I don't want them to get into the woods. Raymond got out of his snowshoes. Then he knelt down and laid the rifle across the sled load, took off his mask and his gloves, and braced himself. He took forever with his aim. When the shot went off, it sounded unbelievably loud in the cold, dense air. The wolves darted away, and the moose did too, stopping after a short distance and looking around. Missed, Raymond whispered. He ejected the shell and brought the last bullet into the chamber and fastened the bolt down. She's dragging something behind her, I said, pointing to what looked like a thick rope. It's her intestines, Raymond said. The wolves already opened her up. The wolves, hanging low at the edge of the trees, were fully aware of us now. I gotta try again, Raymond said. There's nothing else to do. Not now. Raymond took aim. I held my breath. The rifle thundered. Nothing. The moose just stood there, unmoving. I closed my eyes, swaying on weary legs, trying to accept what had happened. It was over for us now. When I looked again, I saw the moose turn and trot toward the trees. Then she stopped and looked around. Suddenly, the moose collapsed, crashing to the snow. What happened? I stammered at Raymond. Raymond was still staring at the moose. The amazement on his face was turning to understanding. I must have shot her in the heart, he said. That's what happens when you get them right in the heart. And that's the end of the chapter. I hope you liked it. I think they're going to make it. This is great. If you have questions, come to office hours. Otherwise, peace.